If you are subscribed to our channel, you'll know that we are busy with a multi-part series on our 1982 CJ7 over here. In part 1, we removed the engine, and in part 2, we did a full teardown of the engine and have taken the head, the block and the crank into our local machine shop to have them reworked. Now, if you haven't watched those two episodes, I suggest that you take a look at them first before you carry on with today's episode. What we want to do today is take a look at our fuel system, as well as the body lift that's installed in this Jeep. Originally, the CJ7 came with a 4.2 litre engine that was carbureted. Now, when you have a carburetor, you have a fuel pump on the engine that is able to suck fuel from the tank. Now, when you convert to fuel injection, you have to add a high pressure fuel pump, which we did over there. Originally, when we converted the Jeep from carbureted to fuel injection, we were using a French shop, and we didn't have enough time to mount the fuel pump over there exactly the way we wanted to. Fuel pumps, high pressure fuel pumps, do not like running on a vacuum on the inlet side. They work much better under pressure on the outlet side. So in order to do that, what you need to do is actually mount the fuel pump at the bottom of the tank. So today the first thing we want to do is move the fuel pump from the top to the bottom of the tank. If you've watched the video where we raced the Mustang at NOLA, you'll know that we struggled with some fuel supply issues. And we believe that was because this high pressure fuel pump was mounted external to the tank. So what we've done on the Mustang is to relocate the pump inside of the tank, and we want to do the same on our CJ7. So today we're going to move the pump not only from the top to the bottom of the tank, but also from outside to inside of the tank. In order to do that, we've got to take the tank out and then do some engineering on the tank, and we'll go through those steps today. The other part we want to take a look at is this body lift that's been installed over here. So this Jeep has a 2-inch body lift, as you can see down there, with these spacers installed at all of the body mount locations. Now, we really don't like the look of this body lift, as you can see over here. It really opens up and leaves this big gap between the body and the frame, which I don't like. So the other thing we want to do today with the engine out is to remove this body lift. Before we can take the fuel tank out, we need to empty all the old gas out of it. So what I've done is just attached a 12-volt battery directly onto the fuel pump, and then taken the output of the fuel pump into an old container, and I'm going to run the fuel pump now and just empty the gas out. Right, so if you can hear, the fuel pump is starting to cavitate, and you'll see there's just a few drops of fuel coming out here now. So the fuel pump is lifting as high as it can, and that's why you don't mount a high pressure fuel pump at the top of the tank, but at the bottom of the fuel tank. So this is all the fuel that we're going to get out of this tank. Anything that we find still left in the tank, the fuel pump is just unable to lift or suck out of the tank. We've loosened all the bolts that hold the fuel tank in place, and we've disconnected the hoses that come from the filler over there. Now we're going to lower this tank down. We've still got some hoses and electrical connections at the top that we need to undo, but we need to get some space to work. So we're going to lower it down and then see how we're going to undo those connections. We've dropped the back of the tank down enough that we can now access this pickup tube over here. So we're going to disconnect the wires and hoses from here, as well as the breather hose from over there, and then we'll go and take the tank all the way out. The Jeep's fuel tank is now out. You can see here's where the head unit connects in, and the breather's over there. It's dirty. We'll give it a pressure wash and clean it up properly. We're going to undo the tank strap and remove the tank from its base over there, and then we're going to decide what we're going to do here to get that high pressure fuel pump inside here. Right, if you are considering doing work on your fuel tank and possibly changing out your head unit, be aware that there are two kinds of fuel tanks. The Jeep has this plastic 20-gallon tank, and it has a big nut here on the head unit. Alternatively, you will have a 15-gallon steel fuel tank. And if you don't know which tank you've got and want to make sure, you can do what I did. I used a little magnet on the side where I could access the tank here and just felt, and it was non-magnetic. Be careful that you don't use the magnet on the shield at the bottom over here, but on the tank itself, non-magnetic plastic tank. You've got a 20-gallon tank, and if it is the metal tank, then you've got a 15-gallon tank. So I've got a 20-gallon fuel tank here. I'm going to go ahead now and remove the head unit from here. All right, to get the head unit out, you simply unscrew this screw over here, and you can then lift the unit out. Just be careful to twist it as you are removing it. Oopsie, now I've dropped the sock in. I'll have to go and fish that out. So there's the sending unit. It's pretty badly corroded. I think I'm going to have to replace it with a new one and then go fishing for my fuel sock. Alright, so to try and get this fuel sock out, what I've done is I've used this piece of wire and very carefully hooked it to the end of the sock. So if you look over there, I'm just going to lift this out of the fuel tank. So there's the fuel sock that was in here, and this has become very brittle, obviously being in fuel for many years. So we're going to throw that out. All right, now we've got to see what we're going to do to get the fuel pump back in there again. So the first challenge we have is that the Bosch 044 fuel pump that we were using does not fit through the opening into the fuel tank. So I'm going to have to go and find a different fuel pump to use that will actually fit through the opening. Bit disappointed by that. This is a good fuel pump that I've used for many years, but can't use it if it doesn't fit. So back to the drawing board. As you probably know, that at the end of a fuel pump in the tank, you need this fuel sock, and this just prevents any debris going into the fuel pump and damaging the fuel pump. So I looked long and hard online, and I was able to find this M18 to fuel sock adapter that I was going to use on my Bosch 044 fuel pump. However, as we know, this fuel pump does not fit into my fuel tank, so I'm going to be unable to use it. So I've had to put that pump aside, and I've got myself this Walbro fuel pump over here. Now there is no way that I could adapt this M18 fitting to fit onto this Walbro pump. And so what I did is I have put an elbow in here and gone down to 1/8 NPT, and then I have made this little adapter. So it is threaded to 1/8 NPT and fits the fuel sock the same size as what this original fitting is over here. So with this adapter I can screw that onto my 1/8 NPT and then push my fuel sock on like that. Now if anybody does need this adapter, drop me a note in the comments below. If there's enough people who are looking for an adapter to go from 1/8 NPT to fuel sock, I might make a couple of these. I'm going to not anodize this just because I don't have the time to do it, but it will be easy enough to get these made and anodized if anybody is interested. So drop me a link and let me know if there's anybody looking for this. I'm going to go ahead now and assemble my fuel pump into the fuel tank. I modified the new head unit by drilling a hole to put a gland in for the fuel pump wiring. I then cut off the barb section of the supply pipe to change it to an AN6 fitting. I need to connect an AN6 fitting to this fuel pickup over here. Unfortunately, this little piece is so short that I cannot use a flaring tool to flare it. So what I'm going to have to do is use some silver brazing alloy to actually braze this fitting onto this pipe. Now I've never used oxyacetylene brazing before, so it's going to be a first time for me. So what I've decided to do is to use a little offcut piece and actually practice over here before I go ahead and do the brazing on this final piece over there. So let me see if I can braze this together, and if I can do that, then I'm going to go ahead and braze that one. Alright, so this joint is actually a very good joint. I used way too much solder, but I'll back the solder off a little bit. It's exactly the same as doing your copper pipes at home, just at a much higher temperature. So I'm comfortable that I can get this together. This has got a good seal over there, so I'm going to go ahead and silver solder this AN fitting. Alright, so what we've done now is brazed the AN6 fitting onto our pickup tube, so we'll be able to plumb the rest of the fuel system with AN6 fittings from here on out. I went ahead and brazed another AN6 fitting to the other side of the supply line. I'm going to use this AN fitting to connect up to the fuel pump inside the tank. So one thing I've noticed while I've been working on this tank is that there's a lot of loose debris at the bottom of the tank, and I want to get that removed before I start reassembling. So what I decided to do is to use my shop vac over here, and I used this adapter into some heater hose, and the heater hose fits nice and snugly into the shop vac here. So what I'm going to do is now put the tip of the heater hose into the tank, and then I'll use a flashlight over here, and with the heater hose through there, be able to suck out all the debris inside the tank. Alright, so we've got the in-tank fuel pump setup now done. What we're going to do is install the filter sock onto the pickup over here, and then we're going to install this inside the tank. And then what I've done is I have just connected the outlet from the pump back to the inlet, and I'm going to put a little bit of gas in here and just make sure that the pump works and that everything is connected correctly before we go ahead and close up the tank. So I'm going to use my little endoscope here to try and show you what it looks like inside of the tank. So you'll see at the bottom there is the filter sock. It's in the lowest part of the tank, at the back of the tank. So that will help if the Jeep is climbing up an incline. Fuel is going to come to the back, and we'll know that that pickup will still be under the fuel. And you'll see then the fuel pump laying at the bottom over there. And there's the rest of the pickup with the wires going down to the fuel pump at the bottom over there. So I know the images is a little bit blurry, but I think you get the idea. The fuel pump sits at the bottom of the tank. So I'm happy with the way this is. I would like a little bit more space with the fuel level sensor over there in that pipe, but it shouldn't ever be down at this level. It'll be low already when it's at this level. So I'm happy with the setup, and I think I'm going to go ahead and button up this tank. While we were disassembling the tanks, we removed these rollover valves, or emissions valves, and as you can see, this one here is really badly dry rotted, and it also broke completely apart. Now, we were able to reassemble them, but they keep jumping apart all the time. And we also had a look at these hoses, and they are extremely dry rotted as well, multiple cracks on them. So what I've decided to do is replace them with these two brand new valves, and I'll also then just put a new piece of hose in. So I'm going to go and just reassemble this vent section here with the new vent valves and the new piece of hose. So we have the new vent valves, or emissions vent valves, installed over there. We've got the head unit in. We did connect up the head unit to a battery and made sure that the pump was running, so we know the connections are good. So the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to lay this tank in its cradle, and then we're going to put the cradle into the Jeep, because we still need to figure out what we're going to do for fuel lines, where we're going to run our fuel lines from here, so that we can get that connected to the fuel filter, and then we'll be done with this. So next thing to do is to put this into its cradle and then reinstall it back into the Jeep. When we removed the fuel filler hoses, we noticed that they were completely dry rotted all the way through. So we do need to replace these and have two new hoses that we're going to be putting back on the Jeep. Before I install my fuel tank, what I want to do is remove the spacers that are in here for the body lift. So you can see them over there. There's one over there, and there's one over there, and up front there's another one over there. So what I'm going to do to replace those or remove those spacers is I'm going to loosen the bolts on that side so that they're loose but holding the body in place. And then I'm going to come on this side and remove the bolts for each one of the spacers on this side over here. Once the bolts are loose, I'll jack up the body on this side. I'm going to remove the spacer. I'm going to replace the bush because they are still the original bushes that came with the Jeep. And then I will lower the Jeep back down again, loosely fit the bolt on each one of these spacers. And then once they're loosely fit, I will go to the other side again. I will do the same thing, jack up the Jeep, remove the spacers, replace the bushes, and then lower them down. Once all the bolts are in and aligned with their threads, and I know that they're good, I'll remove them one at a time, Loctite them, and torque them back down to their final torque. So I'm going to do that, and then once that's done, I'll be able to see exactly where I can route my hoses for the fuel tank. So one thing to remember is that the body lift kit with these spacers comes with longer bolts. So if I'm going to remove the spacer, I need to make sure that I get a bolt that's the right length for without the spacer. So you'll see there, I have purchased the correct bolts to make sure that as I drop this down, I have the correct length bolts because these spacers are going to be removed. So just remember, if you're adding or removing spacers, you need to adjust your bolt length. Now that we've got all the old spacers and bushes out, we're going to go ahead and remove each bolt one at a time, put some red Loctite on it, and then torque them down to 35 foot-pound for the 4 at the back and the 2 in the front, and 50 foot-pound for the 2 in the middle. So we've installed this piece of flex line and our new fuel filter, and then we've made a small solid line to connect up to the body over here, and that is the supply line that will go to our fuel pressure regulator. So it's very tight to get in here, but we've installed the new fuel filler hose as well as the new breather hose over there. So we're going to put some gas in the tank now and then test and make sure that the fuel pump is working. The last thing I want to do is actually run the fuel pump and check that it is all working. So in order to do that, I'm going to remove the fuel pump relay that's over there. And I know power to the relay is either on pin 5, which is that one, or pin 3. I'm just not sure which one. So in order to check, I'm going to use the positive over here. And I'm going to set my meter to continuity. So when that is connected, I know I've got continuity. And if I test pin 5, there is no continuity. And if I test pin 3, there is continuity. So I know pin 3 is the power supply from the 12 volt from the battery. So the one that goes to the relay, the one that goes to the fuel pump is pin 5. So in order to bypass the system, I'm just going to put direct power onto pin 5 over there. At the fuel line, what I've done is I've inserted a stop onto the fuel supply that usually goes to the fuel rail. So I'm going to allow my pressure regulator over here to regulate, and we should see this pressure coming up to about 50 psi if everything is working correctly. The fuel will bypass and return back to the tank. I've connected the negative terminal from another battery to the negative terminal of the vehicle here, so I know our earth is good. And then I've connected the positive to pin number 5 here, which I know is the power to the fuel pump. So when I flick the switch now, I know the fuel pump should run. So one last thing that we need to do is just set the fuel pressure. So with the pump running, you will see that the pressure is just over 40 psi. The Jeep service manual requires a fuel pressure of 49.2 psi, which is close enough to 50 psi for our purposes. So we are going to adjust this fuel pressure up to 50 psi so that it is in line with the requirement of the Jeep service manual. To do that, we're going to put an Allen key in here, and as we screw this down, you will see that the fuel pressure will increase. Until we have it at 50 psi, and then we're just going to take the lock nut and lock down the lock nut. Right, so our fuel pressure is now set with the new fuel pump, and so we are delivering 50 psi to the fuel rail. So once we have the engine in, we'll do a double check and just make sure that that's correct. But for now, this is exactly what we require for the service manual. Before we start assembling the engine, we would like to paint all of the brackets. Now we believe that sandblasting them gives a really good surface for the primer and paint to adhere to. So we're going to quickly sandblast all of these brackets before we go ahead and hit them with some primer and paint. It was rather a late night last night. We've been painting all of our parts ready for assembly. We have our exhaust manifolds over there. They got some high temperature paint. We have all of our black brackets and pulleys. They all got just some engine enamel. Our fuel tank skid plate over there, we wrapped align that just so that it has a nice finish. And then our aluminum parts over there that we put some paint on just to make them look good as well. So all of our parts are now ready for assembly. We can get going putting this engine back together again.
Join us for part 4 by subscribing to the channel and hitting the notify bell.